My new inspiration. Izuku and Kyoka. A girl with short purple-toned hair sat on her windowsill, holding her guitar in her hands. The moonlight bathed her room in a soft silver glow, casting gentle shadows on the walls covered in posters of rock bands. Her fingers moved skillfully over the strings, searching for a melody, but no matter how much she tried, nothing sounded right. Why do I feel like something's missing? She murmured in frustration, letting her head fall against the wall. She sighed heavily and tried again, but the emptiness inside her remained. She played a few random chords, but none resonated with the emotion she was looking for. Her brows furrowed as she tapped her knuckles against the guitar. Damn it! None of this works, she growled, closing her eyes in frustration. Why the hell can't I come up with anything good today? She dropped the guitar onto the bed and ran both hands through her hair, messing it up. Staring at the ceiling, she felt an odd restlessness, something missing, something she couldn't even put into words. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Kyoka, dinner is ready, her mother's calm voice called from the other side. Kyoka let out a long sigh before standing up and stepping out of her room. She trudged down the stairs, finding the warm sight of her mother, Jiro, who, with her signature short purple hair, was practically her reflection. Mika smiled gently while serving the food, but her expression shifted when she noticed her daughter's distant gaze. Kyoka, are you okay? She asked softly, tilting her head slightly. Kyoka shook her head unenthusiastically as she picked up her chopsticks. No, and I don't know why. Her father, a man with a tough appearance but a kind heart, looked at her with his usual serious expression. Maybe listening to a classic will clear your mind. The girl only gave a slight nod and ate in silence. When she finished her meal, she stood up from the table and returned to her room without another word. Her parents exchanged worried glances. Mika sighed, twirling the chopsticks between her fingers. She's been like this for days. I don't know what's wrong with her. Her husband set his chopsticks down and wrapped his arms around her in a reassuring embrace. Don't worry, our girl is strong. She'll get through it. She rested her head against his chest, closing her eyes, hoping that he was right. That night, not even the beautiful starry sky nor the shining moon could lift her spirits. She let herself fall onto her bed with her headphones on, but even the music she used to love couldn't pull her out of her strange mood. There was something about him that she couldn't get out of her head, that awkward, nervous smile, the focused expression he had while running. Izuku wasn't the most sociable person, but he always tried to connect with others. Even if his attempts were clumsy, that only made them more genuine. Without realizing it, she let out a small laugh. That was when her ears caught the unmistakable sound of someone running. Her sharpened instincts as a musician allowed her to recognize sound patterns easily, and it didn't take much for her to guess who it was. She leaned forward slightly, and there he was. Izuku, just like the night before, dressed in sportswear with the tires strapped to his waist. His expression was serious and focused, his breathing steady. Kyoka bit her lower lip lightly, debating whether she should do something or not. Finally, she took a deep breath and decided to act. Catch this. Izuku barely had time to look up before something hit his face with a dull thud. He staggered slightly before regaining his balance, blinking in surprise as the water bottle fell to the ground. Kyoka felt her cheeks burn the moment she realized what she had just done. Ah, shit. Maybe I should have warned him before throwing it, she thought frantically, covering her mouth with a guilty expression. Izuku blinked a couple of times, still surprised, before bending down to pick up the bottle. He turned toward her and, far from being upset, gave her an embarrassed smile. Thanks, Kyoka. She let out a relieved sigh and leaned her arms on the balcony railing. Sorry, that was impulsive. I just wanted to give you some water. Izuku shook his head as he opened the bottle and took a long drink. It's no problem. Actually, I was really thirsty just now. Kyoka looked away, feeling a slight warmth on her face. It wasn't a big deal, she had just given him water. But the way he smiled, relaxed and grateful, made her heart beat a little faster than usual. She looked at her classmate again and noticed the sweat running down his face. Taking advantage of the moment, she asked the question that had been on her mind since the night before. Why do you train so hard? Izuku stopped drinking and looked at her. For a moment, his face returned to that familiar shyness, but within seconds, his expression changed. His eyes shone with determination, and his voice came out firm. I want to surpass All Might and protect everyone I love. Kyoka felt a chill run down her spine as she saw the intensity in his gaze. Her heart skipped a beat, though she didn't understand why. Izuku wasn't just obsessed with training, he had a clear purpose and an unbreakable will. Something inside her stirred at that passion. However, instead of letting herself dwell on those thoughts, she looked away and crossed her arms. Humph. I wouldn't expect anything less from the #1 hero fanatic, she said with a small smile. Izuku chuckled lightly and closed the bottle before tying it to his belt. Well, it's more than that, but I guess you're right. Kyoka watched as he prepared to continue his routine, and without meaning to, before he could start running again, she threw out one last question. Do you pass by here every night? Izuku blinked, surprised by the question. Yeah, it's part of my route. She nodded, pretending to be indifferent. I see, well, try not to kill yourself with all that training. Izuku smiled. I'll try. Then, looking at her with that natural innocence of his, he added, have a good night, Jiro-san. Kyoka felt a slight annoyance at hearing him address her so formally. She didn't want him to treat her like a stranger. In a voice lower than she intended, she murmured, Kyoka. Izuku blinked, slightly confused. Huh? She frowned and crossed her arms. Idiot, just call me Kyoka, okay? Her tone was a bit rougher than necessary, but only because she was nervous. Izuku scratched his cheek and nodded with a small smile. Alright, Kyoka. Have a good night. With that, he turned and continued his training, dragging the tires behind him. Kyoka watched him until he disappeared into the distance. Then, she sighed and leaned against her window railing, feeling her heart beating a little faster than normal. This idiot, look at what you're making me say, she murmured to herself, her face slightly flushed, but with a small smile that refused to fade. On the third night, Kyoka saw him appear once again. This time, instead of just watching, she gathered the courage to talk to him. Hey, Midoriya. Izuku, already accustomed to her presence, stopped and looked up at her with a smile. What's up, Kyoka? She played with her earlobe jack before asking, hey. What do you do when you feel empty or sad? Izuku fell silent for a moment, thoughtful. Then, he smiled gently. Watching something I like helps. It could be a show, a movie, or just going somewhere with a view that makes me feel good. Kyoka sighed, resting her cheek against the palm of her hand. That wouldn't work for me. Izuku tilted his head, curious. No. She shook her head. When I feel like that, nothing cheers me up. No matter what I do. There was a brief silence between them until Kyoka, almost without thinking, said, Hey, can I train with you tomorrow? Izuku looked at her in surprise, but soon his expression turned into a bright, cheerful one. Of course. I'll be here at the same time. Kyoka smiled and nodded. Good, then I'll see you. On the fourth night, Kyoka was getting ready in her workout clothes. Her parents were in the living room, watching her with concerned expressions. Mika crossed her arms. Why are you going out so late? Kyoka adjusted her shoes and sighed. I'm going to train a bit. Her father looked at her intently. You're sneaking off with a guy, aren't you? Kyoka felt the heat rise to her cheeks. Don't say weird things, Dad. At that moment, her ears caught the unmistakable sound of someone running. She knew it was Izuku. She quickly said goodbye to her parents and opened the door to leave. But before she could go, Mika shot Izuku a dangerous look and said with a threatening smile. Bring my daughter back, or you won't have descendants. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Izuku felt as though a cold shadow had wrapped around him, instantly making him pale. He swallowed quickly and nodded with a quick bow, nervously saying, Why yes, ma'am. Kyoka felt the heat rush to her face in an instant. Her mom really had no filter, and her dad. Well, her dad was just looking at her with an expression of complete judgment. She grabbed Izuku's hand and pulled him away from the scene before anything worse happened. See you later, she said quickly as they walked away. Once they were far enough, Kyoka sighed and put a hand to her face. They're such idiots. I can't believe they did that. Izuku, still trying to regain his composure after the scare, let out a nervous laugh as he scratched the back of his neck. Your parents really care about you, huh? Kyoka scoffed, crossing her arms with some embarrassment. They just want to scare any guy who gets close to me. Wanting to change the subject, she rolled her eyes and asked, "Hey, tell me, how far do we have to run?" Izuku put a hand to his chin, genuinely thinking about it. Until I get cramps in my feet. Kyoka looked at him with a worried smile, hoping it was a joke. But when she saw the sincere expression on his face, unable to lie, she started regretting asking. "Wait. You're joking, right?" she murmured, a bead of sweat rolling down her temple. "Let's go!" Izuku exclaimed, not giving her a chance to protest. And so they began running all over the city. Izuku moved with ease, although his breathing grew a little heavy over time. On the other hand, Kyoka was a mess. Her steps became clumsy and erratic after the first few minutes, her face reflecting the suffering of a soul in torment. Passers-by looked at her with expressions ranging from confusion to amusement. Some even whispered among themselves as they watched her stumble like a zombie in the middle of a marathon. "Damn you, Midoriya. Don't you have a heart?" she cried comically in her mind as her legs started to burn from the exercise. Izuku, noticing her state, looked back and smiled innocently. "Hang in there, Kyoka. We're just warming up." Kyoka felt a shiver run down her spine. Warming up, God, let me die in peace. But Izuku just kept running, chuckling softly at her suffering while Kyoka wondered if it was really worth trying to improve her physical endurance this way. Time passed, and the night kept advancing. The city was quiet, barely illuminated by streetlights and the storefronts of the few shops that remained open. Kyoka felt her legs trembling, her breathing completely out of control. She couldn't take it anymore. Her muscles screamed for rest, and her vision blurred. With one last unsteady step, her body gave in, and she collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Izuku stopped and raised an eyebrow. "Giving up?" he asked, a playful smile on his lips. Running beside him had eased most of his nervousness. Now, he felt comfortable talking to her. Kyoka tried to respond, but only a pathetic whimper escaped her lips. "You're a demon," she murmured before completely collapsing. By the time Kyoka opened her eyes again, she was no longer on the ground. Her body swayed gently with each step, warmth surrounding her from all sides. She was on Izuku's back, who carried her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She looked at the sky and noticed the sun was already rising. "What time is it?" she asked in a low voice. 7 in the morning. Izuku answered casually, as if he weren't carrying someone while also dragging massive tires tied to thick ropes around his torso. Kyoka blinked in confusion before realizing the situation. "You're still training while carrying me?" she asked in disbelief. Izuku smiled. Making the most of time is important. The scene didn't go unnoticed. Several people on the street stopped to watch the young man who, despite the physical strain, walked calmly while carrying the girl with no apparent difficulty. Some stood there in shock, others murmured among themselves, and, of course, a few women couldn't help but notice Izuku's physique. "Look at those muscles. How is he doing that so easily?" one of them whispered. Another bit her lip with interest. "Now that is a man," she commented, eyes sparkling as she watched him. Kyoka, still half asleep, let her eyes drift shut again, surrendering to sleep once more. Her breathing deepened as a sweet, intense scent filled her senses. It was an intoxicating aroma, almost addictive, making her body react instinctively. A shiver ran down her spine, a strange tingling awakened inside her, and before she could even process it, her tongue moved softly toward the source of that tempting scent. Izuku felt a chill creep down his back. "Kyoka," he murmured nervously, but there was no response. The girl, still in a trance, continued to give light nibbles and soft suction along his neck, following her instincts without realizing what she was doing. Still trapped in her daze, she heard a voice calling her. At first, it was only a distant whisper, almost imperceptible. But then, her name rang out more clearly, pulling her out of her dreamlike state. "Kyoka, what are you doing?" Her eyes snapped open, and reality hit her like a bucket of cold water. She was still on Izuku's back, her mouth was on his neck, but something had changed. They were no longer walking through the streets of the city. Now, standing in front of them, her mother, Mika, had her arms crossed with an expression that could only mean trouble. Izuku was completely motionless, red as a tomato, and sweating more than usual. Not only because of Mika's intense accusatory stare but also because of what Kyoka had been doing. She had been savoring his neck the entire way back, ignoring his attempts to stop her. And now, to his misfortune, Kyoka's mother was looking at him as if he had corrupted her daughter's innocence. I am innocent, he stammered, raising his hands in surrender. Mika didn't avert her piercing gaze. Oh, really? Then explain to me why my daughter is marking you as if you belong to her. Kyoka felt a chill run down her spine at her mother's expression. Her mind was racing, desperately trying to come up with a good excuse. This isn't what it looks like, she murmured, but even to herself, her voice sounded weak. Mika raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Oh, really? Then explain to me what it looks like, Kyoka. Kyoka felt her face burn with embarrassment and hurried to get off Izuku's back, stumbling slightly in the process. Her legs were still shaky from running for so long and from the situation she found herself in. Izuku, on the other hand, remained completely still, as if the slightest movement could seal his fate. Mom, it's just that. I was asleep and. She glanced at Izuku for help, but the poor boy only looked away, clearly having no idea how to save himself, let alone her. Mika clicked her tongue and stepped forward, placing a hand on her daughter's head. Asleep? So you're telling me you did all of this unconsciously? Kyoka nodded frantically, hoping it would help ease the situation. But her mother only sighed, crossing her arms. Daughter, are you telling me that in your unconscious state, you dedicate yourself to licking and biting boys' necks? Because that is what I saw with my own eyes. Kyoka wanted to die on the spot. It could not be more humiliating. That's not it. It was an accident. I didn't do it on purpose. Izuku, still red as a tomato, tried to intervene. And Mrs. Jiro, really, I didn't do anything. I just brought her home because she fainted after running. He swallowed hard. She just clung to me on the way, and I didn't want to wake her up. Mika fixed her gaze on him intensely. So you just brought her home, huh? And by pure coincidence, my daughter was biting and leaving marks on your neck, as if she was claiming you. Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine. Please don't say it like that, he exclaimed desperately. Kyoka wished she could disappear. She could not even look her mother in the eye, much less Izuku, whose neck still had the evidence of what she had done. But then, a thought crossed her mind. What had she been smelling? She remembered the strong, intoxicating scent that had driven her to act that way. She looked at Izuku, specifically at his neck, and bit her lip nervously. Mika finally sighed. Izuku, I have no doubt that you're a good kid, but if I ever see you in a situation like this with my daughter again, you already know what will happen. Izuku nodded frantically, swallowing hard. Why yes, ma'am. I completely understand. Mika looked at Kyoka with a mix of amusement and seriousness. And you, young lady, get inside the house. We are going to have a very, very long talk. Kyoka groaned in frustration but did not dare protest. She turned to go inside, but before closing the door, she glanced over her shoulder at Izuku. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she blushed even more. Thanks. For bringing me home, she murmured before shutting the door quickly. Izuku stood at the entrance for a few seconds, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Then, with a heavy sigh, he ran a hand down his face and muttered to himself, how the hell did I end up in this? As night fell, Kyoka let out a deep sigh, resting her forehead against the window frame while she frowned at the street. Since she had returned home, her mother had not stopped making comments that made her want to disappear from the face of the earth. Mika was ruthless when it came to teasing her, especially after what had happened with Izuku at their doorstep. Just remembering it made her face burn. Her earphone jacks twitched involuntarily when they picked up the sound of someone running. Instinctively, she turned her head, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw Izuku approaching on the sidewalk. Their eyes met, and the boy, still unable to forget what had happened hours earlier, turned red almost instantly. Even so, he lifted a hand somewhat nervously and waved. Are you going out for a run tonight? Izuku asked, scratching the back of his neck, unsure if that was the right thing to say after everything that had happened. Kyoka blinked a couple of times, feeling her face heat up with embarrassment. She crossed her arms, trying to maintain her composure as she answered with apparent indifference. Ugh, I don't think so, my leg is killing me. She looked away with slight annoyance. She wanted to go, but the truth was that her entire body was sore. Last night's training session had nearly knocked her out, and just thinking about repeating it right now made her shudder. Although her body longed to be with Izuku, her mind resisted. Izuku looked at her with understanding, though he could not help but chuckle. I warned you to stop biting my neck, but you didn't listen. Maybe karma decided to do its job. Kyoka's eyes widened in horror. Without thinking, she pointed one of her earphone jacks at him like a weapon ready to fire. Don't even mention it, she shouted, feeling her embarrassment consume her to the core. Izuku moved swiftly, dodging a sound wave. Kyoka groaned in frustration when she saw his amused smile. Alright, I won't say anything else. He raised his hands in surrender, though the amusement on his face betrayed him. Kyoka huffed, crossing her arms. I don't know why the hell I agreed to go for a run last night. I'm not a runner or anything like that. She muttered, pouting in a way that, to Izuku, only made her look even more adorable. Izuku looked up at her from the street and gave her a soft smile. Well. Then get some rest. I'll see you tomorrow, Kyoka. She did not respond immediately, her gaze remained fixed on him from the window, watching his figure illuminated by the glow of the streetlights. When she saw Izuku begin to turn to continue running, a quiet murmur escaped her lips, barely audible. See you tomorrow, Baka. A slight smile formed on her face before she closed the window and lay down on her bed, feeling her heart beating a little faster than usual. In the following nights, Kyoka gathered the courage to go running with Izuku. Little by little, her body adapted to the effort, though she never quite reached his level. And now, on their last night of training before classes at UA resumed, she once again found herself resting on his back as he carried her home. The sky was beginning to lighten, and a gentle breeze cooled their faces. Kyoka could feel the steady rhythm of Izuku's heartbeat against his back, and her mind wandered. At first, she had only seen him as a companion, but something had changed in her this past week. She did not know how to explain it, but she liked being close to him. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see him in a different way. Hey, will you still invite me when you go out to train or run? She asked softly, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling comfortable. Her heart was pounding, but she did not want to pull away. Izuku turned his head slightly and smiled warmly at her. If you want to, you can always come with me. Kyoka closed her eyes and smiled. I'd love that, she murmured, letting herself drift into sleep. Just seconds before she completely dozed off, her thoughts wandered, and without thinking too much, she let out a soft whisper. I think I like you. Izuku felt his mind come to a complete halt. His face turned red, and for a moment, he thought he had misheard. I must have imagined it, he quickly told himself, shaking his head. Throughout his school life, he had always been the odd one out, the one no one wanted around. So, he forced himself to believe that he was just misinterpreting his friend's words. By the time they arrived at Kyoka's house, it was already 6 in the morning. Mika was waiting for them at the entrance, arms crossed, dark circles visible under her eyes. Her expression was a mix of annoyance and a hint of pride. I really appreciate both of you for keeping me awake all these nights. Now I look older than I actually am. Izuku let out a small laugh, trying to ease the tension. That's not true, Mika-san. You still look quite young for your age. Mika looked at him mischievously and smiled. Era. Don't think that flattering me will make me accept you dating my little girl. Izuku's eyes widened, and he quickly waved his hands, completely flustered. It's not like that. It's not what it looks like. Mika let out a playful laugh and patted him on the shoulder. I'm just messing with you, kid. But remember. If you ever break her heart, I'll cut off what makes you a man. Izuku swallowed hard, feeling a shiver run down his spine. Why yes, ma'am. Behind him, Kyoka stirred slightly on his back, murmuring something before settling even closer to his neck. Izuku sighed. This week had definitely been strange, and exciting. With Mika's permission, Izuku carried Kyoka to her room and, with great care, laid her down on the bed, making sure she was comfortable. He watched her for a few moments, a small smile appearing on his lips, before turning around and silently leaving the room. He made his way downstairs, intending to leave quickly, but Mika was already waiting for him, leaning against the table with a neutral expression. Before he could say anything, she gestured for him to sit down. Izuku swallowed nervously and obeyed. "Sit down for a moment, Midoriya." Her tone wasn't threatening, but it left no room for argument. Izuku settled into the chair, feeling slightly anxious. Mika poured him a glass of water and handed it to him without saying a word. He took it with both hands, trying to steady his nerves as she stared at him intently. "This is way too uncomfortable, and I don't think my heart can take it," he thought, trying to focus on the glass of water. He took a sip, hoping the silence would finally end. Then Mika spoke with complete calmness. "I think my daughter wants to fuck you." The water Izuku had just started to swallow shot out of his mouth, drenching Mika in the process. Pfft. Mika closed her eyes for a moment and sighed as she grabbed a towel to dry her face. A slightly dangerous smile formed on her lips. Izuku covered his face with his hands, feeling completely mortified. "Mika-san, please don't say things like that out of nowhere," he protested, but the woman continued as if nothing had happened. "My little girl has never shown interest in any boy, and suddenly, I see her licking your neck in the middle of the street." Mika crossed her arms. "Not to mention that the other day, I walked past her room and, let's just say I heard your name in a rather interesting tone." Izuku wanted to disappear from existence. His face was so red he felt like he was going to explode. I don't know anything about that," he stammered, frantically waving his hands in front of him. Mika looked at him, and her expression grew more serious. "Listen to me, Midoriya." Her tone was now much heavier. "Kyoka is my little girl. She may be old enough to make her own choices, but if you play with her and break her heart, there won't be a force in this world strong enough to stop me from making you suffer." Izuku felt a chill run down his spine and swallowed hard, but he quickly closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, his expression had completely changed. The nervousness disappeared, replaced by an unwavering seriousness. This wasn't just any conversation, it was something important. "I would never hurt Kyoka. She is my friend, and I would never use her just for my own amusement." He clenched his fists on the table. "This week has been strange, but it also made me realize that she is someone important in my life." Mika analyzed him in silence for a few seconds before smiling with a hint of approval. "That makes me happy. But Midoriya, if you like my daughter, you should do something about it before someone else does." Izuku opened his mouth to respond, but then he just fell silent, his mind a complete mess. Mika let out a soft laugh. "All right, it's really late. You should go home and get some rest." Izuku nodded slowly, feeling exhausted both physically and mentally. "Thanks for the water, and for not killing me." Mika smirked playfully. "Don't thank me so soon, Midoriya. You're still in my sights." Izuku quickly stood up and bowed before leaving the house. As he walked back home, his mind couldn't stop replaying Mika's words, and what Kyoka had said when she was half asleep. "I think I like you." He slapped his cheeks, trying to clear his head. "There's no way, does she really feel something for me?" He wanted to deny it, because in all his years, no girl had ever been interested in him. But a part of him couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was different and her feelings were real. As he walked past a store, his reflection in the glass showed a slightly flushed and confused face. He let out a heavy sigh. "Stop thinking about it, it'll only make things weirder between us." But deep down, he couldn't ignore the warmth he felt every time he remembered those words. Classes started, and without exception, everyone noticed that their shy classmate, who used to turn red whenever a girl spoke to him, was now completely normal around Kyoka. Some just found it curious, but others, like Mina, were beyond excited, watching what looked like a budding romance straight out of one of her favorite Korean dramas. "This is amazing. I swear, something is happening between those two," Mina whispered excitedly as she watched Izuku and Kyoka talk effortlessly in the classroom. "Don't exaggerate, Mina," Momo replied with a light smile. "They could just be good friends." "No. Girl, I've seen enough dramas to know that chemistry like that isn't normal." Ochiko glanced at Izuku and Kyoka out of the corner of her eye, noticing how Kyoka leaned slightly toward him as they talked and how Izuku seemed more relaxed than usual. Well, they do seem closer than before, she admitted with a slight hint of jealousy. One day, everyone was in the gym. Some were using training machines, others were hitting punching bags, but the real action was happening in the center of the ring. Izuku and Kyoka moved in circles, studying each other carefully. "Remember to follow your opponent's footwork," Izuku said calmly, his stance relaxed but ready to react. Kyoka tried to focus on her movements, watching how he distributed his weight. She clenched her teeth and threw a punch straight at his face, but Izuku tilted his head to the side, dodging it effortlessly. Easier said than done. Kyoka muttered in frustration before launching a second strike, this time aimed at his side. Izuku blocked the attack with his forearm and, before she could react, stepped forward, invading her personal space. Kyoka instinctively moved back, but he was already on her. "Too predictable," Izuku commented with a confident smile. With a quick twist, he caught her wrist and, with a slight push, threw off her balance. Kyoka felt her feet lose their grounding. In a desperate attempt to avoid falling backward, she grabbed onto Izuku's arm, unintentionally pulling him down with her. The result was immediate. Both hit the mat with a dull thud, a sharp gasp escaping Kyoka's lips as her back met the ground. Her heart pounded as she realized the position they had ended up in. Izuku was on top of her, his hands planted on either side of her head, his face mere inches from hers. Kyoka felt her breath hitch. Her hand, without realizing it, had landed on Izuku's firm chest, feeling the warmth radiating from his skin through the fabric of his tight shirt. The murmurs of the spectators in the gym barely registered in their minds. Izuku raised an eyebrow, a spark of amusement in his eyes. "New tactic? Because if it is, I have to admit, it almost worked." Kyoka blinked several times, her face heating up as she processed how close they were. With an embarrassed grunt, she tried to push Izuku away. "Shut up and move," she exclaimed, but her voice sounded far less threatening than she had intended. The heat of Izuku's body pressed against hers, surrounding her completely, and that damn scent of his, the one that always drove her crazy, hit her full force. Her heart pounded harder, and her face grew even redder. "Oh hey, didn't you hear me? Get off me," she mumbled, but this time her voice was even weaker than before. Izuku, suddenly aware of how close he was to Kyoka, was hit by Mika's words all over again. "My daughter wants to sleep with you." That realization made him even more conscious of the situation, and his face turned bright red in an instant. I am sorry," he stammered, trying to get up quickly. However, in his clumsiness, he lost his balance again and fell even closer. Now their faces were only millimeters apart, their breaths mixing. Their bodies reacted on instinct, screaming at them to stop holding back. A few meters away, the entire class watched with wide eyes, unable to believe what they were seeing. Mina was the first to react, bouncing excitedly. "Oh my god! This is a romance in the making," she exclaimed with enthusiasm. Momo, with her cheeks flushed and a nervous look in her eyes, quietly intervened. "And maybe we should give them some privacy." Meanwhile, Ochiko barely managed to murmur a name. "Deku." Her chest felt strange, as if something was pressing on her heart seeing him in such a close situation with someone else. Kyoka, completely embarrassed, pushed Izuku off of her and stood up abruptly. "Stop throwing yourself on top of me, you idiot." Izuku, still with his face red, rubbed his head. I didn't mean to." Kyoka huffed, looking away, but the blush on her cheeks betrayed that she was also embarrassed. She turned her back to him. "Forget it, nothing happened." But of course, something had happened. And after that day, her life turned into chaos. Every time she had a moment of peace, one of her friends would pop up with a question about Izuku. And they weren't subtle. One day, while she was having coffee in the cafeteria to stay awake after spending the night watching movies with Izuku, Mina suddenly appeared with a mischievous grin. "So, did you already hook up with him?" Kyoka choked on her coffee, coughing violently as Mina laughed playfully. "Cough, cough. What the hell, Mina? He's just my friend." Mina crossed her arms and tilted her head with an amused expression. "Yeah, sure, as if I haven't seen the way you look at him. And don't get me started on how you cling to him when you're together." Kyoka frowned but couldn't find a way to respond without revealing even more. Another day, she was in the recreation room, relaxing on a couch while playing her guitar. Since she became closer to Izuku, she felt like her inspiration had returned, and now she was composing more melodies than ever. Just as she finished a chord, an unexpected voice sounded beside her. "What a beautiful song. I'm sure it's for Izuku." Kyoka jumped and almost dropped her guitar. She looked to her side and saw Ochako smiling sweetly at her, although that smile didn't hide the jealousy she felt inside. "How the hell did you get so close without me noticing?" she yelled, putting a hand to her chest, feeling her heart race. Ochako laughed and shrugged. "Special skill. But don't change the subject. Come on, who's the song for?" Kyoka frowned. "I've already told you, I'm not dating Izuku." But it was getting harder and harder to convince them. Or even herself. Another day, in the library, she was sitting at a table with her best friend, Momo, who was reading in silence. However, every now and then, Kyoka noticed how Yaoyorozu kept glancing at her from the corner of her eye. Finally, she sighed and let the book she was reading fall onto the table. "Come on, Momo. It's obvious you want to say something, just spit it out already." Momo slowly lowered her book, looked at her intently, and in a completely serious voice, said, "You like the color green, don't you?" Kyoka blinked. Her eyebrow twitched with a nervous tick. Out of all the questions she'd been asked so far, that was by far the most subtle, but the message was the same. She covered her face with both hands. She couldn't keep going like this. The final blow came during a sleepover with all the girls in the class. Between snacks, movies, and games, the inevitable topic came up again. This time, it was a full-on ambush. Mina, with a mischievous grin, "Kyoka, what's it like to kiss Izuku?" Toru, with a conspiratorial tone, "Does he get nervous when you hug him?" Tsuyu, in her usual calm but direct way, "How strong is his grip when he carries you?" Rib bit. Ochako, with a more serious look, "Is he good in bed?" Momo, sipping her tea with her usual elegance, "Do you feel butterflies when he touches you?" Kyoka clutched her head, her forced smile growing tighter with each second. She tried to ignore them, but the pressure kept building with every question. Her patience was hanging by a thread. Then, finally, she snapped. She shot up to her feet, her face burning red with fury, embarrassment, and something else she didn't want to admit. "You annoying bitches. If you really want to know the truth, then fine, I'll tell you." All of them stared at her, eyes gleaming with excitement. Kyoka clenched her fists and shouted, "I like Izuku. I want him for myself. I want to take him to bed and f** him until he's completely drained. Are you happy now?" Absolute silence. The girls blinked, processing what they had just heard. Then, Mina was the first to react. "Ha ha ha, I knew it," she screamed, pointing at Kyoka, while the others burst into laughter and applause. Kyoka, realizing what she had just said out loud, felt her dignity shatter into a million pieces. She dropped to her knees and covered her face with her hands. "Shit. I fucked up." The girls in the room looked at each other before bursting into laughter. Mina rolled on the bed, clutching her stomach, while Momo and Ochako were too red-faced to say anything. Tsuyu simply blinked, tilting her head. "Well. I can't say I expected it, but I'm not surprised." Kyoka felt like her soul was leaving her body at that moment. "Don't laugh, I just said the most embarrassing thing I've ever said." "Oh, come on, Kyoka." Mina wiped the tears from laughing and put on some sunglasses that had mysteriously appeared. "You're in the right place because I can give you some advice. Even though it might not seem like it, they call me the Cupid of love." "Are you sure about that?" Tsuyu interrupted with her calm tone. "From what I heard, your fourth boyfriend ran off to another country to get away from you." Mina fell silent for a moment before laughing dramatically, waving her hand dismissively. "Just rumors, nothing more." Then, she placed a hand on Kyoka's shoulder and looked at her with a confident smile. "My friend, what you're experiencing is called late love." Kyoka stared at her in disbelief. "Do you think I'm stupid? You just made that up." Mina saw her expression and withdrew her hand, shaking her finger. "My friend, I can see your insecurity, but trust me, I'm not lying." She raised her hand. "You have all 5 symptoms of late love." She raised one finger. 1. You got curious about Izuku, to the point of feeling intrigued and wanting to spend more time with him. That's the curiosity symptom. Another finger went up. 2. You denied it, because it seemed crazy to feel something for someone who was just a classmate until that moment. That's the denial symptom. Another finger. 3. You felt attracted to him, you wanted to be with him no matter what. That's the obsession symptom. 4 fingers up. 4. You tried to deny it again, telling yourself it wasn't possible. That's the idiocy of denial symptom. Finally, she raised the 5th finger. And 5. Now you look for any situation to be with him, eager to have him close, just for yourself. She paused dramatically, building suspense. And now you want to fuck him. The last thing she said caught everyone off guard, and a silence fell over the girls. Momo turned so red she looked like she was going to explode. Ochiko covered her mouth with both hands, and Toru was fascinated. Suyu blinked, processing the information, while Kyoka felt like her life was over. And that, my friend, is the symptom of I want him all to myself in my bed every night. Before she could process what she had just heard, Kyoka threw a pillow directly at Mina's face with such force that Mina fell backwards onto the bed. You're all perverts. Kyoka stammered as she stormed out of the room, her face flushed. The girls exchanged mischievous glances with smiles. Well. That was a yes, Mina concluded with satisfaction, removing the pillow from her face. Kyoka stomped down the hall, still red with a mix of embarrassment and anger. Damn perverts. You're hopeless, she muttered, clenching her fists as she walked down the hallway. What the hell is wrong with them? It's like I'm their personal entertainment, she grumbled, puffing in pure frustration. Just because I like Izuku doesn't mean that. She stopped suddenly, her eyes widening in horror. Shit. I admitted it out loud. She covered her mouth with both hands and looked around, making sure no one had heard her. She sighed in relief, luckily, no one heard me. She was so caught up in her internal crisis that she didn't notice when she turned a corner without looking and collided head-on with someone. With the impact, she ended up on the floor, rubbing her hips with a grimace of pain. Are you blind, idiot? She snapped without thinking, still furious from the conversation earlier. Sorry, Kyoka-chan, I didn't notice. Her whole body tensed. That voice. Her gaze slowly lifted, and there he was. Izuku, with his usual warm smile, slightly leaning toward her and extending a hand to help her up. Her heart raced. No. This is too much, she thought, biting her lower lip. If she didn't do something to calm herself right now, she was going to end up doing something she might regret. Without thinking too much, she grabbed his hand firmly and, in a swift motion, pulled him down. Izuku let out a slight grunt as his back hit the ground, and before he could react, Kyoka was already straddling his hips, staring down at him with her face burning. Her breathing was heavy, her mind a whirlwind of chaotic thoughts. She didn't know how to express everything she was feeling, so she simply let the first word that came to her mind slip out. Date. Izuku blinked a couple of times, clearly confused. Doctor's appointment, he asked innocently. Kyoka felt a part of her patience slip away in that moment. She was torn between kissing his sweet face or punching him for being so dense in picking up on her hint. She forced herself to take a deep breath to calm down. You and me. Now. Outside. Alone. Her voice sounded determined, but without realizing it, her face was getting closer to Izuku's, little by little. Izuku sighed, now understanding the situation better. He looked into Kyoka's eyes and saw many things: love, longing, obsession, affection. But also fear. And that fear was one he knew well. It was the fear of being alone. The fear of no one wanting to be with you. It was the same fear he had hidden for years, convincing himself he would never have a relationship and that his only purpose in life would be to be a hero. Calmly, he sat up as best he could, despite Kyoka still sitting on his hips. She seemed uneasy, afraid that he wouldn't accept her invitation. But Izuku, true to his sweet nature, gently hugged her, offering a sense of calm. That gesture managed to soothe her heart. Kyoka, you're very important to me, but I'd like you to calm down before we have a date. Kyoka felt a pang in her chest. It felt like rejection, even though it wasn't. But then, Izuku smiled that signature smile of his and added, How about we start like we always do and watch a movie in my room? Kyoka looked at him, surprised. I'll make dinner, and you pick a movie. Deal? She pulled back slightly from the embrace and looked at him with a calmer smile. That sounds perfect. But she wanted more. Izuku noticed. He remembered Mika's words, telling him that Kyoka had feelings for him. He swallowed nervously, feeling his own face heat up, but he decided to gather his courage. He leaned in slightly and left a kiss near the corner of Kyoka's lips, barely brushing them. Kyoka was left in shock. Her eyes went wide, and her face turned bright red. Izuku was also red, as that had been his first kiss. Even if it wasn't directly on the lips. To ease the tension, Izuku smiled playfully and, without warning, wrapped his hands around Kyoka's hips before lifting her effortlessly. What the hell do you think you're doing? She stammered, flailing her arms in the air from embarrassment. Consider it my revenge for making me fall. Izuku let out a small laugh while holding her firmly in the air. Kyoka hit her face against his chest, feeling her heart race 1,000 miles per hour. Fine. But don't make a habit of it, she murmured softly, too drained to keep resisting. Izuku just smiled and began walking with her still in his arms. He could feel the warmth of her body pressed against his, her breath hitching as it brushed his neck, and the subtle scent of her perfume mixing with the adrenaline of the moment. Kyoka, on her part, kept holding onto his shirt, refusing to look up. Don't look at me. This is so embarrassing. Izuku let out a light laugh. But I hardly did anything, you're the one who jumped on me. She immediately reacted, giving him a light shove on the shoulder. Shut up and keep walking. Finally, when they reached the room, they turned on the TV and started a movie. However, halfway through, Kyoka took the remote and paused the screen. Izuku looked at her curiously. Kyoka took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for something important. It was time to say everything she had been keeping inside. Izuku. There's something I need to tell you. Izuku straightened slightly, noticing the seriousness in her tone. I'm listening. Kyoka clenched her fists before letting out a nervous laugh. You drive me crazy. Izuku blinked a few times, confused. Huh? She sighed and got a little closer. I like everything about you. Your smile, your voice, that damn way you're always so kind to everyone. And that toned body of yours, it drives me crazy. It pisses me off how you make me melt just by looking at me. Izuku felt his face burn, but Kyoka wasn't done yet. Even your scent, she said quietly, looking away, embarrassed to admit it. And every time I'm near you, my heart races, and when you're not around. It's worse. I've gotten so used to you, and now I don't know what I'd do if you weren't here. The silence between them was overwhelming. Izuku could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but instead of saying anything, he simply leaned in and hugged her tightly. Kyoka, without hesitation, curled up against him and let the moment speak for itself. Without realizing it, they both ended up lying on the bed, one on top of the other, holding each other as the movie played on, neither of them really paying attention to it. Weeks passed, and eventually, the inevitable happened. Izuku was the one to take the first step in formalizing the relationship. And the whole school would remember that day because Kyoka, in her excitement, did something crazy. Lunch was going on normally in the UA cafeteria when Izuku sat down in front of Kyoka with a determined look on his face. She looked at him curiously, taking a bite of her food. Kyoka, would you be my girlfriend? The fork slipped from her hand. Her eyes widened, and she felt heat rush to her head. Without being able to stop herself, she leaned across the table and kissed him on the lips. Before Izuku could react, she ran out of the cafeteria, leaving everyone present in complete silence. Izuku, with his hand on his lips and his face as red as a tomato, barely managed to stammer. Huh. It was then that the school speakers emitted a struggling sound, followed by an excited voice that echoed across the campus. I'm Kyoka Jiro, from Class 1A. Izuku Midoriya is mine and no one else's. So don't even think about it, bitches. The entire cafeteria fell silent. Then came a, "Ah. I'm sorry," followed by the frustrated grumble of Principal Nizu, muttering about students not respecting the authority of their principal. Everyone turned to look at Izuku, who at that moment wanted to disappear from the face of the earth. He lowered his head and muttered to himself. I'm going to punch Kaken for giving me the idea to confess in public instead of a private place. Izuku muttered, burying his face in his hands as he felt everyone's eyes on him. His classmates could barely contain their laughter, and murmurs filled the cafeteria. Meanwhile, in her room, Kyoka tossed and turned in bed, hugging her pillow tightly, her face completely red from happiness. "Oh my god, I'm so happy," she shouted, kicking the air in excitement. Elsewhere in the school, Katsuki was sitting calmly in the bathroom when he suddenly heard Kyoka's announcement over the speakers. His expression went from calm to completely pale. "Shit. That nerd's probably going to punch me." And he was right. That afternoon, during the combat training session, Izuku and Bakugo were having an intense showdown. Their blows echoed throughout the area, but this time it wasn't like their past fights full of uncontrolled hatred and rivalry. Now, even though they were still hitting each other hard, there was something different, a connection between comrades who understood each other's way of expressing frustration. Okay, I messed up." Bakugo growled, repeatedly slamming his palm on the ground in surrender. Izuku, with his face red from embarrassment and contained anger, had him locked in a hold. "No, you didn't just mess up. Do you have any idea how awkward it was to leave there with the whole cafeteria staring at me? Now they call me the hero Romeo," he huffed, tightening the hold a little more in frustration. From the bleachers, Kyoka and Momo watched them calmly. "Meh, I'm not complaining. Now everyone knows you're mine," Kyoka said, crossing her arms with a satisfied smile. Momo, on the other hand, blushed slightly inside. "I would have preferred more discretion," she said with her composed demeanor, but she couldn't deny that the scene had been entertaining. Later, it was time to visit Kyoka's parents' house. Izuku was nervous, but the confession of their relationship was much simpler than he had expected. Her father simply gave him a pat on the shoulder and told him to respect and take care of his daughter. Mika, on the other hand, nodded calmly, though her smile hid something more. After a while, Kyoka's father left to run some errands, and Mika took the opportunity. "Honey, pass me some water, it seems like your boyfriend is thirsty," she said sweetly. Kyoka nodded and got up from the table to go to the kitchen. It was at that moment that Mika leaned across the table, grabbed Izuku by the shirt, and gave him an innocent smile, but with a dangerous glint in her eyes. "I hope you're gentle with my daughter when you two do it. And if you get her pregnant, you better marry her. You understand, right?" she said, while her free hand mimicked scissors with 2 fingers. Izuku swallowed hard. "Of course, mother-in-law," he replied without thinking. Mika narrowed her eyes dangerously. "It's Mika to you. You're not married to my daughter yet to call me mother-in-law." Her tone was sweet, but with an implied threat. Izuku nodded frantically, feeling a chill run down his spine. He only sighed with relief when Kyoka returned with the glass of water. He took a quick sip, as if that could calm the rapid beating of his heart. Meanwhile, Mika hid a small smile, watching with amusement as her daughter sat back down next to Izuku. She was actually delighted for her daughter. She knew Izuku was a good guy, but she simply couldn't resist scaring him a little. After all, seeing his scared puppy expression was too funny to pass up. As the night went on and it grew late, Mika invited Izuku to stay. Kyoka tried to hide her excitement at the idea of having him at her house for longer. When everyone went to bed, Izuku was already settling onto the couch in the living room, stretching his arms with a yawn when he heard a whispering voice calling him. "Love, come here for a minute, I need your help with something." Izuku blinked, surprised. It still felt strange to him that someone was speaking to him so sweetly. Spending his whole life as an outcast without a quirk had really affected how he saw himself. But there she was, looking at him with a smile that made his heart beat faster. He smiled, feeling a slight warmth in his chest. "All right, love," he replied, getting up and following her. She led him to her room, and he couldn't help but take in the details around him. The walls were decorated with posters of rock bands, several guitars hung strategically on the shelves, and on her desk were some music sheets along with pictures of her participating in musical events since she was little. He walked over to one of the pictures, where Kyoka was holding a guitar with a big smile. "You looked beautiful in this performance," he said sincerely. Kyoka felt a flutter in her chest. Very few people really took the time to appreciate her world and her passions. She smiled, feeling warm from his compliment. Do you think I'm attractive?" she asked, blushing slightly, nervously playing with the ends of her headphones. Izuku looked at her intently and, without hesitation, replied honestly. "You're attractive, and more." Kyoka felt her heart race, but still, doubts lingered in her mind. She bit her lip before adding, "Even if I don't have wide hips or big breasts like Momo or Mina." She gestured to her chest, emphasizing her point. Izuku chuckled softly, moving closer to her and gently taking her hand. "Kyoka, I love you just as you are. You don't need to compare yourself to anyone. To me, you're perfect." His sincerity left her speechless. Her face turned bright red, and for a moment, she felt like her chest was going to explode from happiness. She bit her lip, looking down, but couldn't help smiling widely. "Bibaka," she murmured, giving him a light tap on the arm. But deep down, her heart was screaming with joy. How was it possible that every word Izuku said made her feel this way? His honesty, his tenderness. It was as if everything about him was made to love her. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions rushing through her. She had secretly planned something with a bit of uncertainty, but now, after hearing those words, after seeing those eyes full of love and devotion for her, she had no doubts. She loved him. She wanted him. She wanted him to be hers, and she wanted to be his. "Close your eyes, love," she said in a soft but confident voice. Izuku blinked, a bit confused, but obeyed without hesitation. He heard the sound of fabric sliding. His heart raced, and his mind tried to figure out what was happening. "Now open them. And be honest," she said. Izuku opened his eyes. And was left breathless. Kyoka stood in front of him, wearing dark lingerie that contrasted with her pale skin. The soft light in the room highlighted the smoothness of her figure, the delicacy of her curves. Her hands trembled slightly, and her evasive gaze showed that she was nervous. But still, there she was, standing, offering him her trust, her love. Izuku swallowed, feeling his face burn. "Kyoka." His voice came out softer than he expected, almost a whisper. She looked at him with some shyness, waiting for his reaction. He smiled gently, and without breaking eye contact, let out a soft laugh. "I'd love to take a picture so I don't forget this moment. You really look unbelievably sexy," he confessed without any filters. Kyoka felt a chill run down her spine. The way he looked at her, with admiration, with desire, but above all, with genuine love, made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "You're an idiot," she murmured, but her satisfied smile gave her away. She slowly moved towards him, placing her hands on his shoulders and looking him directly in the eyes. "But you're my idiot." Izuku felt a warmth spread throughout his body. His trembling hands gently rested on Kyoka's waist, feeling the warmth of her skin. Their hearts beat strongly, sinking to a rhythm only they understood. It was their moment. Just the two of them. Kyoka closed her eyes, and with a mischievous smile, she whispered against his lips, "I hope you rested well on the couch. Because tonight, I don't plan on letting you sleep." Izuku chuckled softly before kissing her, knowing that this night would mark a turning point in their story together. Their lips met in a slow, deep kiss, as if every second they spent together was meant to be etched in their memories. Kyoka felt her skin tingle under Izuku's caresses. There was no rush or nervousness, only the sincere desire to feel closer to each other. "You have no idea how much I love you," Kyoka whispered, her words filled with a sweetness that made Izuku smile. "I think I do. Because I love you the same, if not more," he replied, gently stroking her cheek with his thumb. For them, the feeling of being together, exploring each other with tenderness and devotion, was intoxicating. There was no room for doubts or fears, only complete trust. Every touch, every kiss, was a promise of unwavering love. Kyoka closed her eyes, surrendering to the sense of safety that only Izuku could give her. And when they finally crossed that line, nothing else in the world mattered. It was just the two of them, wrapped in the warmth of their love. As the night went on, the soundproof panels did their job, preventing Kyoka's soft moans from being heard. At first, she tried to hold back, but the sensation of being penetrated so passionately while Izuku gently caressed every part of her body, was overwhelmingly pleasurable. What neither of them knew, however, was that someone else in the house spent the entire night unable to sleep. In another room, Jiro was lying on the bed, her eyes wide open with a nervous twitch in her eyebrow. She tried to ignore it, tried to block it out, but her quirk, the same as her daughter's, picked up even the smallest details. She swallowed and placed a hand on her forehead. She knew this day would eventually come. But she never thought it would be today, and certainly not that she would hear it so clearly. "They'll pay for this tomorrow," she whispered with a mix of exasperation and resignation, massaging her temples. When the light of dawn filtered through the window, Kyoka shifted beneath the covers. Her body felt strangely light, relaxed, with a pleasant warmth running through her. She opened her eyes and, turning her face, saw Izuku sleeping beside her. His breathing was calm, his hair messy, and his expression so peaceful that it made her heart skip a beat. She bit her lip, unable to stop a radiant smile from forming. She then carefully got up, grabbing a shirt to cover herself before leaving the room. She walked down the hallway with evident happiness, not noticing the special glow on her face. However, as soon as she entered the dining room, her joy froze when she saw her mother sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in her hands. And deep bags under her eyes. Mika watched her with an arched eyebrow and a sly smile. She took a sip of her coffee before speaking in a voice filled with exhaustion but amusement. "So my princess is all grown up now, huh?" Kyoka felt like her soul was leaving her body. Her face went from a relaxed expression to one of pure horror in a matter of seconds. Her headphone ears perked up, and her skin turned completely red. She had barely come down for breakfast and was already facing the worst possible scenario. What? Mom, she exclaimed, her voice trembling, looking at Mika as if she had just received a surprise attack. Her mother, holding a cup of coffee with dark circles under her eyes that spoke for themselves, returned the look with a mocking grin as she rested her head on one hand. "Sweetie, I thought those sound panels were effective, but with my quirk. Let's just say I didn't sleep a wink last night," she said with an exaggerated sigh before taking a sip of her coffee. Kyoka felt like she was going to die right there. Her mom knew. She had heard her. She covered her face with both hands, wanting to sink into the floor and disappear. Not only had it been her first time with Izuku, but now her mom was giving her that kind of talk like it was nothing. "Oh, come on, it's not that bad," Mika added, amused, waving her hand. "I'm happy for you, but if you keep this up, we should talk about contraception methods." "Mom." Kyoka screamed, feeling her body temperature rise. She ran out of the kitchen as if she had been shot, while Mika burst out laughing. At that moment, Izuku came downstairs, still half asleep, his hair more disheveled than usual. He rubbed his eyes and looked at Mika with a puzzled expression. "Good morning, Mika-san. Is something going on?" Mika stared at him, a mischievous smile forming on her face. Nothing. Just that next time, maybe you could try being a bit more discreet, don't you think?" Izuku blinked several times, confused, until the meaning of her words hit him like a bolt of lightning. His eyes went wide, and his entire face turned bright red in an instant. It's not what it looks like," he stammered, nervously waving his hands. Mika just laughed harder while Kyoka, who had heard everything from the stairs, screamed in embarrassment. Time skip. A few years later. Years passed, and what had started as days of fluctuating inspiration for Kyoka had now turned into moments filled with love and happiness. Not only was she a great hero alongside her husband, but the family they had built together brought her an indescribable joy. Kyoka sat on the couch, holding her guitar in her hands, watching Izuku play on the floor with their 3 little children. They were triplets. A blessing she never could have imagined, but one that filled every corner of her life with light and happiness. One of them was trying to climb onto Izuku's back, while the other 2 laughed, trying to catch him. "Honey, I think you're surrounded," Kyoka said with a smile, gently strumming the strings of her guitar. "I won't give up without a fight," Izuku responded dramatically, lifting one of the children into the air while the other 2 pounced on him, laughing. Kyoka chuckled softly, her heart swelling with love. She had found more than she had ever dreamed of. A true love, an amazing family, and a life filled with music, heroism, and happiness. She leaned forward, resting her head on the body of her guitar, letting out a sigh of satisfaction. If she could talk to her past self, the one who worried about how others saw her or got frustrated when she couldn't find the perfect sound, she would tell her not to worry. Because in the end, everything had turned out much better than she could have ever imagined. And to think it all started that night when she saw her husband, back then just her classmate, running under the moonlight, lost in his training. A soft laugh escaped her lips as she remembered those moments. Now, her life was complete, surrounded by a family she loved, and who loved her just as intensely. She couldn't have asked for a more perfect ending than that. End of the story.